Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a review of the Paradigm 8000F monitor series speaker. So this is a big speaker and I have a lot to go over with you, so try to stick it out until the end of the video. Also, please hit the subscribe button so you could catch more videos like this in the future. Let's get started. To start this video off, I have my seat set at the same height as my couch, just to give you an idea of how big these speakers are. But let's start with the box, okay? Because the box is huge. Now I'm 6'1", and you could see just how big this box is. Not only is the box large, but it's also 79 pounds shipped. I believe the speaker itself weighs about 70 pounds in itself. So just keep all that in mind, because if you have a bad back, this type of weight, no good. No good. And I know, so I'm speaking from experience, so make sure that you have somebody at home to help you with these speakers if that's the case. So let's get started with the speaker itself. As you can see, the speaker is a very large speaker. The exterior of the speaker, as far as how it looks on the outside, it's not going to win any awards. It looks like this IKEA stand back here. It's pretty, it's pretty basic as far as the exterior looks. Nothing too fancy. I think that it would look a lot better in white, because they do sell it in white, so then at least the speaker part that's in black would stand out. But as far as the exterior finish of it goes, it's just a solid black. There's not really any type of a pattern to it or anything like that. Something like this SVS over here has like a wood type of look to it. So it definitely looks a little bit nicer, but if you don't care about it, this might be a great speaker for you. In the back, we have 2 ports in the rear, and there's one set of the binding posts. So this is where you're going to put your wires and connect the receiver to the speaker, okay? So again, there's 2 ports in here, so I'm going to take my hand and just kind of stick some fingers in there so you kind of see just how big the port is, okay? Again, I'm 6'1", so my hands are, in proportion to my body, at least somewhat, so that'll just give you an idea about how big the speaker hole is. And again, it's heavy, so it's nice to have a pair of gloves like this that are rubber. It makes it a lot easier to grab these things and move them around. I also, on the bottom of here, I put some felt. I go to a store and I pick up some of those like 3M felt stick-on things. So sometimes for me, I like to put that instead of using the manufacturer's like rubber screw-in base feet thing. Especially on this floor, which is tile, I just find that the pads work a lot better. I think it looks nice with the grill on. I think that it might even look a little bit better because, again, it doesn't really have any type of a styling to the speaker, so to speak, that's anything fancy looking. So, it's pretty plain. Okay, now to go over some specifications before I get into the whole review of it. So try to stay with me. Need my glasses. This speaker is a 3-way speaker. So over here you have your tweeter, you got your mid-range, and you got your 3 woofers. Okay. These 3 woofers are active woofers, which means that your receiver is going to power them. Okay. So with that said, you have a 1-inch, what they call an XPAL dome tweeter. It's ferrofluid damped, cooled, and it has a perforated phase aligning PPA lens. So that's this tweeter. To my eyes, it looks like a aluminum dome tweeter, kind of the same as the SVS and the Definitive Technology style tweeter. The mid-range is a 6.5-inch mineral-filled polypropylene cone with an inverted dust cap down roll surround. So that's here. Now this mid-range doesn't move, okay? So it's not flexible like how the woofers move a little bit. A lot of manufacturers make a mid-range where it moves. Some of them don't. Typically, if the mid-range is going to move, it probably has a little bit of the upper bass in it. Okay, so the bass drive is you got 3 8-inch, and it's the same as the mid-range. It's a mineral-filled polypropylene cone with inverted dust cap and a down roll surrounds. The low frequency extension on this, they have it at 35 hertz. The frequency response on axis is plus or minus 3 decibels from 45 hertz to 21 kilohertz. And let's see, the sensitivity. Now, this is one of the reasons why I picked up this speaker, was because it's rated at 95 decibels. That's really high, 95. Most speakers are more so in the upper 90s, around 87, 88, 89. Some of them are 90, 91, but for this one, it's rated at 95. And what that means is, with your receiver, it's going to play louder with these speakers than a speaker that's rated at like 87. So the power is going to be used a lot more efficiently with these speakers. Let's see, so the suitable amplifier power range is going to go from 15 watts to 150 watts. So 150 watts, what they're saying, that's the high end. Now, a good rule of thumb with home theater, I gotta take these off. Oof. A good rule of thumb with home theater is, you're better off having more power than less power. Because less power is not going to be clean. It's going to make the speakers distort. And when it distorts, that's what causes damage to the speakers. So you're better off having more power. Now, you don't want to have too much more power that you actually cook the speaker. So you don't want to cook the components of it by, say, I wouldn't hook up like, an amp that's like 300 watts a channel to this thing. That's just bad. But the manufacturer has it rated at up to 150 watts. So, probably if it was a little bit over, it would be okay. If you're unsure, contact the manufacturer. For the test, I use the Onkyo RZ840 receiver, which is about 120 watts a channel. So it's a nice wattage for the specifications. Let me see if there's anything else. The speaker is also an 8 ohm speaker, which is nice because an 8 ohm speaker is not going to put a heavy load on the receiver. Typically, when you purchase a speaker, most receivers are okay with 8 ohms, they're okay with 6 ohms, but 4 ohms, a lot of receivers have problems with it. Even if the manufacturer rates it for 4 ohms, the sound quality might not be as good at 4 ohms. So probably the best thing to do is to try to pick out a speaker that's rated at 8 ohms. At least that's the way I do it. I always look for a speaker that's 8 ohms. Let's see, so the weight, according to the manufacturer, looks like 69 pounds. Let me confirm. Yep, 69 pounds. The printout is absolutely atrocious. Okay, so 69 pounds. And if you're wondering, the crossover is at 2.5 kilohertz. So the crossover from the tweeter to the mid-range is 2.5 kilohertz. And then from the mid-range to the woofers is at 550 hertz. They do have a speaker which is the Monitor 6000F, which is the same as this, but it has 5.5-inch woofers. It has 3 5.5-inch woofers, and the mid-range, where's the mid-range? It's a 5.5 as well. So this mid-range again is 6.5, and these woofers are 8-inch. So that might be something to consider as something that could sound kind of similar. It's definitely going to have less bass, but it does have the same tweeter, which is good because I really, really, really like the sound of this tweeter. Now, everybody's going to have their own opinion on how a speaker sounds, because we all have different hearing. We all have different rooms that the speaker's going to be played in, whether you have a floor that's a wood floor, a tile floor, carpeting, you know, depending on the walls, what's on the walls. Everything is going to change the sound of the speaker. Also, the source that you're playing it on. So if you're playing it on an MP3 that's 128 kilobytes a second, and please don't do that because, you know, that's just totally horrible. I mean, at the very least, use an MP3 that's a full 320, use an AAC file with a 320 kilobyte a second, use a FLAC file, use a CD itself, or one of the new high-res audio players out there. So just, you know, keep that in mind. So the source, the speaker can only play as good as the source, and then as good as the wiring or the Wi-Fi that's connecting the source, of course, because a lot of times when you're playing something with Wi-Fi, the source, if your Wi-Fi is slow, it's going to drop the kilobytes or the megabytes per second in order to compensate. So if you're playing it, so let's just say for the sake of argument that you're using a CD, it's only going to sound as good as the CD, it's only going to sound as good as the CD player, as good as the wiring that's connecting the CD player to the receiver, then as good as the wiring that's connecting the receiver to the speakers, and then finally as good as your amplifier that's in your receiver or your separate amp. So just a little thing to keep in mind. I know it's not very little, but again, it's only as good as the source and, you know, everything that's chained together. So let's get started with my notes. Okay, so a few words to explain how this speaker sounds. It's a very warm sounding speaker, okay? It has a soft sound and it's very full sounding. The sound of this speaker, it's very full sounding, very warm sounding speaker. This is not a speaker that sounds bright by any means. This speaker I also find not to be ear fatiguing, okay? And what I mean by ear fatiguing or ear tiring is when I'm listening to a speaker and the speaker makes me kind of like go, all right, you know, I'm kind of done listening to it, or I feel like it's giving me a headache, or I feel like I want to go over to the volume and just turn it down, and then turning it down some more and some more, because it's just really it's just, you know, totally, you know, giving me a headache. That's what I mean by ear fatiguing. So this speaker I don't find ear fatiguing, and I didn't find it ear fatiguing with like a whole bunch of different music sources that I listen to. Everything from old stuff to new stuff. This speaker is very consistent in the lows, the mids, and the highs, but I noticed as the volume went up, more of the details came out, okay? So at a lower volume, it had less detail and it was less spacious. But the higher the volume, the more of the details came out. And again, this is a warm sounding speaker, okay? Okay, so next I want to point out some speakers that might sound kind of similar to this. So when I'm listening to this speaker, I'm thinking of different manufacturers that I have listened to their speakers, and especially ones that I have a lot more experience with. The tweeter on this speaker is really excellent. I really, really, really enjoy the sound of this tweeter. It has a nice balance. It's sharp, but it's never harsh. I never found it to be harsh. I was never going like, ooh, like this is, you know, killing the music. It never had a sound like it was sizzling. It's just a nice sound that's balanced, but the sound of the tweeter, and maybe it's because of this all around the outside over here, it has a nice sound. Like the sound is like coming out, but the sound of the speaker is a very a gentle sound, I find. So it's not a speaker that's very pushy. It doesn't sound like it's really like forcing you to hear it. It's a very soft sounding speaker, but To get back to it, this tweeter reminds me more of the SVS Ultra. It's not as sharp as the Definitive Technology tower speakers. That tweet is a little bit more crisp, a little bit more sharp. It's not quite that, but if you do like the sound of those tweeters, this is a speaker that you might want to consider. Also, if you're a fan of Polk audio sound, I do think that this is a speaker that you also might want to consider listening to as well, because I find that the Polk audios are a little bit on the softer sounding side as well, and the tweeters on those, I never found them to be ear fatiguing also. So I do think that comparing the sound of this speaker with those speakers, I think it's fair. The mid-range detail on this, I don't think it's quite the SVS Ultra. It's not there, but when you turn it up, it gets closer. The Definitive, the bipolar towers, I believe the mid-range on those it's better at a lower volume. Okay, this needs to come up in volume more. The voices on this do sound good, but it's just, it's such a warm and full sounding speaker. So those speakers aren't quite this warm. Like the SVS, I feel like is a little bit warmer than the Definitive when I listen to the two of them. I'm talking about the SVS Ultra, because I like this more than the SVS Prime. The SVS Prime tweeter, I don't care for it at all. I feel like those speakers lose it in the upper end because of the Prime's tweeter, but this tweeter is so much better than that. Again, I feel like it's more like the Ultra's tweeter. Now everybody's going to have their own opinion, of course, but that's what I'm hearing. Now the placement. Let's talk about the placement of this. I took this speaker and I put it up against the wall, like close to the wall, like a few inches from the wall when I say that. So this speaker, in my opinion, needs to be at least about 7 inches. That's about 7 or 7.5 inches. So I usually just take my hand and I put it on the back of the speaker to see, about how far. But for the sake of it, also do want to take a just gonna do a quick measurement over here just to show you how tall this is. So 40, 43, I mean this is, yeah. So this speaker is over 44 inches. I know it's on the specification. It's on the specification sheet, but so what I'm saying is, you're looking at about 7 inches or so minimum. I don't think that it sounds very good that close to the wall. I noticed when I was more around the 12, 13 marker, away from the wall, at about 12 inches, 13 inches, I felt like the sound opened up. There was more, I want to explain this right. There was more like of a sound stage, more of like depth to it. It almost had a bit of a feel of like, you could hear the bass more spread out on the wall compared to when it's closer. Pulling the speaker further away from the wall brings out the mid-range, okay? It brings out the mid-range, and it also seems to make the rear ports function better. My suggestion for this speaker, if you're purchasing it, plan on keeping this at least 8 inches from the wall. But I would say 12 inches even better. I tried this speaker out where it was like over here, so like 1.5 feet, 2 feet away. When it's pulled out further from the wall, the mid-range becomes more clear. But I don't think it has to be that far away from the wall to sound good. I think that, at least a foot or more. So I'm going to say 12 to 16 inches. I think that might be a nice sweet spot. The speaker sounds much better in a live room. Again, this is a very warm sounding speaker, so you want to match it up to the proper location. The environment has to be right for this speaker. I don't think that putting this speaker in a room where there's carpeting is a very good idea, because I think it's going to be too warm and too soft sounding. But I think this speaker is great in a room just like this, where the floors are all tile or all wood. Maybe there's an area rug here and there, but overall a very live room. So the sound of the room is going to be very bright, very live, and that's where I think that this speaker is going to shine. Again, a room where there's carpeting, it's going to absorb a lot of the sound, and I don't think for this particular speaker that's a good idea. Of course, in your home, that's something for you to choose. Your listening preferences, your equipment, it's all going to play a role in it. Because the speaker, again, is such a warm sounding speaker, I would not match this with an amplifier that sounds warm. So the test, again, is using the Onkyo. Now the Onkyo, in my opinion, it sounds like it's somewhere in between a Denon and a Marantz. So Marantz is a warm sounding amp receiver, and that's something that seems to be pretty universal. People seem to agree about that everywhere. Whereas a Denon is a very bright sounding receiver, or the amplifier that you might use as a Denon. A Denon is a very clear sounding receiver in my experience, okay? So I would be looking at a Denon or the Onkyo, but I would not match this up with something that's warmer sounding, and I think that that's so important. So if you hook this up to an amp that is much more cool sounding, bright sounding, clear sounding amp, and you put this in a live room, I think that that's where it's going to shine, because this speaker does not need any additional warmth. I do want to point out that because of the connectors in the back, you can't do a bi-amp on this, and some people like the bi-amp. I only tried it one time with a speaker. I hooked it up, I bi-amped it, and I couldn't tell the difference. I mean, this was years ago, and I was like, I couldn't tell the difference. Your location in relation to this speaker, because that's important as well. This speaker, the bass, it really doesn't change much whether I was sitting down or I was standing up. There might be a little bit more bass when I was standing up versus when I was sitting down, okay? When I was sitting down, the mid-range, I think it was a little bit better because I'm sitting back further away, so I'm sitting back and I'm listening to this, so the sound has a chance to spread out, because remember, the speakers always send the sound out in like a cone, okay? So it starts off here and it's coning outward. So this speaker, I liked it because the sound did not change that much. Also, when I was walking around the speaker, and I'm up and I'm walking around it, the tweeter still sounded great. It really didn't lose that much, but I think ideally the best sound with this speaker is definitely sitting down. I think that it brings out the mid-range. Again, pulled out from the wall a little bit, at least a foot or so, and I think that standing up as well, it does sound good, because for me, it's important to have a speaker where I can turn on music and I can be walking around the area and doing other things. I usually don't sit down and listen to music. That's just not me. I usually turn on the music and I walk away. Listening to music sources with this, I did find it to be very consistent. It was very consistent, and it didn't ruin anything. And some speakers will sometimes make a recording that was relatively poor, it'll make it sound even worse, because sometimes the speaker is just bringing out the details in the recording. It's bringing out too much. And you know, this speaker never made things sound horrible. So, for example, Dire Straits, the song Money for Nothing. I was listening to it on another speaker brand, and I was like, boy, I was like, wow, this, you know, it sounds terrible. Like, I couldn't even listen to it. It sounded terrible. But on this speaker, it sounded great. It sounded almost like I was listening to it in concert. There was such a nice fullness about it, which I probably should mention that sometimes when I'm listening to this, the sound of the speaker reminds me of when I'm at a concert and it's early in the night. So, you know how concerts typically, what they do is they play music in between bands, or they have music playing early on, and that music is always at a much lower volume. Sometimes the sound of it kind of gave me that type of a feeling, like I was at a concert and it's early on, and you know, that's what it sounded like. So I really appreciated listening to you know, that song on these speakers. You know, I don't want to purchase a speaker where I'm going to hate half the stuff that I listen to. It just doesn't make sense. The voices on everything came through very well, and you know, the overall sound of it was good. It was well balanced. I'm sure that, you know, I'm sure that probably the biggest question with the speaker is how is the bass, and you know, should you add a sub to it? Well, it does have the 3 8-inch, so the bass it's really good. It doesn't sound to me like, you know, like a speaker that it's 2 5 1/4 inch or 2 6 1/2. And I'm not saying that some of the 2 6 1/2 can't sound pretty good, because they can, but it has nice, strong sound. For music, I don't see a reason to add a sub unless you need a lot more oomph to it. Potentially, if the amplifier you're hooking up to, it's like a 50 watt or 100 watt, then yeah, you know, a sub is probably a good idea anyway. But if you're going to be at least 120 watts and up, then you know, you probably don't need to spend the money on the sub, especially if you're on a budget. Speaking of budget, these do sell for $800 each. And that's it for my notes. I do hope that you enjoyed this. If you have any questions about the speaker, if you have any comments, please leave it in the comment section, and please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Thank you.